Welcome to Redacted Opinions, unfiltered, raw, and authentic. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the hosts alone. And now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to Redacted Opinions, unfiltered and raw. This week, we're getting back to our normal cadence and topics, a little more light in nature, but no less important. We're going to be talking about crisis communications, which, of course, very important during an emergency. But in any emergency, you've got to have clear communications, and a major incident can destroy the trust that company's been working so hard to build with its clients, with its customers, with the public. And so we're going to be looking at some examples today where those communications fell apart from Rogers' network, basically based on communications. You think they'd have a great communications plan, but we'll see that even they can fail or drop the ball on that. And we're going to talk about some other breaches that happened in Canada over the last few months and years. Canada has seen what happens when organizations are not ready to communicate under pressure. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, the importance of being prepared before the incident happens. Corporate communication is not public relations after the fact. It is a part of emergency management, business continuity, stakeholder protection, and building public trust. And you'll see in our examples that it could cost you a lot of money when it's not managed properly. So before I get into my first example that's been handed to me by my partner in crime, Brian Claman. Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm feeling a lot more comfortable about the future of the world and not having a nuclear bomb dropped on us because we finally have peace with Iran. They've come to their senses. They understand that the president's not messing around. He's not just any idiot. And the Straits of Hormuz are open.
Are we?
Or so he said.
Are we talking nonfiction now, or are we still sticking to fiction? Like fact?
Insert sarcasm here.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right. I was wondering if you'd lost your mind or I missed something.
Okay, so I'm good now. Price of fuel seems to be going down and all is good in the world.
For the meantime.
But I'm looking forward to today's topic.
So let's get into it. We're talking about crisis communications in particular. Communication in general is important, but under pressure, when something goes wrong, all too often, these companies have an after-the-fact approach to things, and they start scrambling when they shouldn't. If they've given it some thought, if you've given it some planning, it should be built into your plans, but sometimes even good planning falls apart. And that's where our first example comes in. Rogers, very well known, love them or hate them. They're one of our major providers of telecommunications. Communications, right in the word. So you'd think that they're experts at it. But as we found out, Rogers suffered a major national network outage on July 8th of 2022, so a few years ago. But it affected everything and everybody. You hear about it pretty quickly when the internet goes down and your access is no longer there. It included 911 access in some areas. Businesses, government services all fell down because they're all reliant on that network. The CRTC's independent review found that the outage lasted from 4:58 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 8th to about 7 a.m. on July 9th, so almost one day, with services gradually being restored over that time. The communications problem that we are specifically highlighting here is that Rogers' own communications capability was affected by the outage. The CRTC assessment found that when both wireless and hardwired networks that they used fail, Rogers staff, including critical incident management staff, could not communicate effectively during the early hours of that outage. So what does that mean? Rogers had to basically go out and buy SIM cards and put them in their phones to be able to reestablish communications with their teams and start planning, rectifying the issue and getting back to normal. This is a powerful example because the communications failure was not only external, it was internal to the company. And that is rare. Usually the network fails, but your internal communications are still managing to work. During a national crisis, the company struggled to coordinate because it did not have sufficient alternative communications capacity or backup redundancy plan that was able to work. So our lesson here is that a crisis communications plan cannot depend on the same systems that failed during the crisis. If your plan B relies on plan A and plan A fails, then it's not really a plan B. And so you got to figure that out before it happens. In this case, I'm sure they've got a plan B and C at this point. But over to you, Brian, any comments on that?
Yeah, it just shows how complicated this is in that you've got a major corporation, Rogers, and they had this major failure. I don't know what their emergency management plan is, what their strategy is. I think it was a wake-up call that it took over 24 hours to get this resolved. Often when there's a crisis, it involves just the company. When you're talking about a utility, a public utility, critical infrastructure, it involved all of us. 911 was down. And when you think of what the result of that could be, The thing is, though, Rogers is a monopoly. Rogers and Bell really control the world. So the effect on them is not going to be the same as the effect on most companies, like the second example I'd like to talk about. And I don't know if you remember, Luke, but the Lac Mégantic disaster in Quebec, the railway derailment involving the Montreal Marine and Atlantic Railway.
Terrible.
That incident involved a runaway oil train operated by Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic Railway. It derailed and exploded in Lac Mégantic in Quebec. 47 people died. It was tragic. The city was inferno. Basically, the downtown core of the city burnt. The Transportation Safety Board later documented major safety failures in its accident investigation. The railway was heavily criticized for its public response. Crisis communication, commentators said that the company violated the basic principles of crisis communications. Essentially, they were more worried about their reputation rather than getting the truth of the information out. The public that were impacted in a real serious sort of way. They just couldn't get information of what to do, how bad this was. They underplayed what was happening, and that was just a disaster. But unlike Rogers, in the example you gave, Luke, this company went out of business. And most companies, you might recall the statistic in business continuity planning, most companies do not have a business continuity plan with a strong crisis communication component, will be out of business within 6 months to 9 months of the incident. This is something that you really have to think about. And I will tell you, as a consultant, most of my clients, and many of them are large corporations, some of them multinationals, don't really have effective business continuity plans or crisis communication plans.
What this reminds me of is the BlackBerry outage of years gone by. If you recall, global outage. At the time, BlackBerry was the cream of the crop, top of the pile. You couldn't touch them. Their security was vaunted as the best. The president of the United States carried a BlackBerry. Everybody talked BlackBerry. And then they had that global outage, and it took them almost 24 hours before they even responded officially. And I think it was Zaris who came on to acknowledge the outage almost 24 hours after it happened. And the way he acknowledged it, no explanation. If you see the video, I remember watching it, it looked like he was in a closet, no professionalism. And to your point, where's BlackBerry today? People lost confidence in the product. It started to tank soon after. Stocks went down, and they're nobody today.
I haven't seen a BlackBerry product for years. I didn't know that you can still get a BlackBerry type product.
Yeah.
I think a common theme, and with the other examples we're going to give in a second, is that no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you plan, bad things happen. And you're going to be judged on not only on the fact that something happened, because often it's not your fault, okay? But you're going to be judged on how you were prepared to deal with it and how resilient you were. Because most plans fail to put in context. And good plans, and plans that you and I have been involved in, are looking at the fact that the assumptions we have, like our G20 plans, were going to fail, and we had alternates. And we have 2 or 3 or 4 deep alternate plans. Often, most people just have the bare minimum, and when it doesn't roll out the way they thought it was going to roll out, they're in a world of hurt. And they're not only hurting themselves, but they're hurting their customers, and they're hurting the community, depending on what services they provide. Do you want to talk about the next example?
Yeah, I'll go into the next one. I got others popping in my head. I'll follow your script, sir.
Okay, that's the way I like it. Yeah.
So our third example is the Life Labs cyber attack in 2019. Life Labs, certainly us who are getting up there in age are familiar with Life Labs because they do all our tests. They track all our health results. So they got a lot of personal information. It is Canada's largest medical laboratory company. It suffered a cyber attack affecting access to that personal health information for millions of Canadians. Privacy regulators later found that Life Labs had failed to take reasonable steps to safeguard personal information and personal health information. The problem? The breach involved extremely sensitive health information. In that type of incident, communication has to be fast, clear, direct, and practical. What happened? Who is affected? What information was exposed? What the company was doing or what the company is doing about it, and what patients should do to protect themselves. The regulatory findings show that the underlying privacy and security failures became the main public story, weakening trust in Life Lab assurances. Unfortunately, like Rogers, they're a monopoly, so we don't have much choice. We still have to use them. But that said, why does it matter? Health data breaches are not ordinary corporate incidents. People cannot simply change their medical history the way they can change a password. Poor or incomplete communication increases anxiety and reduces public confidence. In a cyber incident, silence or vagueness creates a second crisis, especially when you're dealing with people's personal information. They are fearful, there's a lot of speculation, and there's a loss of trust.
Now, Life Labs didn't go out of business.
No, they can't.
Certainly in Ontario, I think they're the only lab doing everything.
Yeah.
And apparently they were just sold to an American company. I was listening on the news today. They're well protected for Haas, but the priority they had for dealing with Ontario specimens first, all these specimens now, or many of them, are going to go to the States, and they're anticipating there's going to be delays. I don't know why they were sold. I don't know if it's fallout from the cyber attack that took place 6-7 years ago, or it's just the normal course of business. But the next example that I'm going to give you is what could be worse than going out of business. Listen to this one. Desjardins privacy breach took place in 2019. Desjardins disclosed a major privacy breach in June of 2019. The Federal Privacy Commissioner later found that for 26 months, a malicious employee had been exfiltrating sensitive personal information. I would have thought that they would catch this within hours. 26 months. And this is a company that should know better. The communication problem was that the breach affected a federally chartered financial institution where trust is central, a bank or a financial institution. Trust is a cornerstone. We're giving them our cash. We're giving them our money. We're trusting that they know what they're doing and they're taking care of this valuable information. And this showed that bad things happen. The problem was not simply that the data was stolen. It was that the breach had gone on for a long period before being publicly addressed. Desjardins later agreed to a class action settlement framework of over $250 million. Now, I'm not a bank, and that's probably not a big thing for a bank, but that would crush most companies, okay? So $250 million financial settlement. Maybe that's why their ATM fees are higher now. But why does this matter? The longer a breach remains undetected or unexplained, the more stakeholders question the organization's controls, transparency, and governance. I had, when I was at a large commercial property management company, one of our office towers in Alberta, in Calgary, had a cyber breach in which the pass card system was hijacked and we were locked out of the building. And what we did was, it was embarrassing. We knew we were going to be in trouble, but we spoke with lawyers and the Federal Privacy Commissioner, and we let our tenants and the affected people know right away. We didn't wait 2 years. We didn't wait 2 days. We let them know as soon as we knew. We let them know what we were doing, and we let them know what the contingency was. And what that did was, it went a long way in helping us salvage our reputation. And most people affected understand that things happen, but they were impressed with the fact that the organization had a plan to deal with it. So why does this matter? So when customers ask, how long did you know and when did you tell us, the answer can define the entire crisis and how your reputation is impacted.
This reminds me of another, to me, when we talk about crisis communication, I think one of the Cadillac case studies of how to do it right, even though lawyers will disagree, was the Maple Leaf Listeria outbreak. Going back a few years again, I think it was Maple Leaf Food. It's a good story. This to me was a Cadillac example of how to do it right, because and we don't know this for a fact because we weren't in there, but the legend is that when the Listeria broke, the news broke that one of their plants had been contaminated with that, of course, they bring together their crisis communications team. And what are we going to do? And of course, the lawyers stick their 2 cents in there. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't admit to that. Don't admit to the other thing. And everybody had their 2 cents. And then finally, the CEO, in his frustration, I guess, basically said, everybody get out. He basically kicked up the lawyers and said, what's the right thing to do here? And I think that's the important thing. What is the right thing to do? You're going to get sued regardless. But I think if you focus on what the right thing to do is, that will play to your favor when it does go to court, when it inevitably goes to, more importantly, the court of public opinion, because that company did not go broke. In fact, they turned it around. And like I say today, people reference that incident as the way you should handle crisis communications. Clear, honest, and to the point.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story. It took place a long time ago, probably 25, 30 years ago, involved me and a family member, an uncle. He was the vice president at a food processing company in Montreal, major national company, and a little bit like your example, but I don't think they had the same CEO that was focused on doing things right or actually knew what to do. And if you recall, I think it was Pope Jean Paul back in the 80s or 90s when he was visiting Canada. And this company had the contract to feed the Montreal police, the RCMP, that were in charge of people's security. And they too had a food, and rather than disclose it, fearful of the bad publicity, They tried to handle it internally, and as a
Yeah.
result, a whole bunch of security people, police officers, got sick with food poisoning. No one died. They just had stomach aches and everything like that. But they just suffered economically and reputationally. Think of it. You go to the supermarket to buy the product, okay, and now in the back of your mind, you're thinking, is this the company that had that issue? And they didn't tell anyone about it. So this stuff is important, not just because it's the right thing to do, even if you don't care about morality. It's important just for your survivability as a business.
Just look at what's going on. Driscoll is a strawberry producer, and they've been all over the news the last couple of weeks because of the chemicals that they're using on their crops that are cancer causing, right? I haven't seen anything from that company say either we're guilty, but here's why we're doing it, and it's just the positives of why they're doing it, or to deny it. I haven't seen anything from them. So they're basically letting the public and the media drive the conversation. It's very similar to, you remember the BP oil spill. There's another great example where they literally destroyed the water, the wildlife in the area of the spill. And yet their communications people were going on TV telling the media, the public, oh, we're going to be working with the locals. We're going to hire them to clean up and all this kind of great stuff. And then somebody, I can't remember which news agency it was, they actually went down to the town and they're interviewing people like, those people haven't even been here. We don't even know what they're talking about. So it was a real disconnect. They looked awful. They paid, I think they suffered. They're too big to fail. BP, huge, right? They're not going to friggin' go bankrupt. They'll find a way to get their money back. But they got a lot of public damage as opposed to going back to the Maple Leaf example. I remember the person who delivered that message was the CEO. It wasn't somebody from public relations. The CEO comes on TV. No flashy lights, no slick gimmick, just sitting at his desk saying, hey man, I'm sorry. Yeah, we screwed up. Owning it, here's how we're fixing it. Our apologies, give us a second chance, we're gonna make it better. That's how you handle crisis communications.
I'm not a communications expert, but we worked with them over our career and we worked with some really good ones. And one of the things I've learned is get ahead of it right away. Don't deny it, don't hide it. Say we screwed up like he did, if that's the case. Acknowledge what happened and put it behind you. What happens too often is organizations and leaders try and spin it, and it spins out of control, and then they can't come back. Let's talk a bit about what corporations can do. I'm thinking about when you and I were down in the financial district running different office towers with our group of other security directors. And if you recall, back then in the early 2000s, there was all sorts of fears of terrorism and anthrax and stuff like that. Culminating years later to the Eaton Center shooting, if you remember. The Eaton Center in Cadillac Fairview, what they would say, what the police would say, there wasn't coordination. And one of the things we did as a security group representing major commercial real estate is we connected with the Toronto Police and we reached out with their corporate communications team, Megan Gray, if you remember. So Megan, we got a problem. When stuff happens, okay, and you guys are involved or fire's involved, when a big incident happens, we use Eaton Center shooting as an example, that building now becomes a crime scene. And you're now telling the public that they can't get to this area for X amount of time until the police finish what they have to do. The victim company is telling people that are calling about their cars, well, you can get your car on this day or go there and do this. And the message was not the same. And it worked for a while. I don't think it's still working anymore. But basically, when there was a major crisis in the downtown core involving one of the member companies and the Toronto Police, crisis communication leaders of our respective companies would hop on a call with Toronto Police and their corporate communications, and they would get their message together. They would get it right. It's not that they were cooking the message, but the worst thing in a crisis is you have contradictory messages coming out from authority figures, such as the police or the company. So these are the type of things people should do. People have to think about this in their crisis communication plan, their crisis management plan. There's an expression I use, and I say this to clients all the time. What to do it? You got to ask yourself this question. What will we do if such and such happens? And if you don't have an answer, that's an area you've got to work on because it will come back to bite you. What to do if you don't have life insurance? That's a problem. You got to look at that.
And I think part of the problem, at least in my experience, has been that the way we're talking, the way we're thinking, you don't get many people like that in any of those other silos. And they are silos. You've got marketing people who just don't give it a second thought because they're focused on marketing, even though they're the ones tasked with managing the relationship with the public. You got PR leaders who think that they've got all the time in the world and that the world's waiting for them. that they're going to wait for the official word. They don't give a crap about what the company has to say anymore. It's not like in the old days, you had a shooting at the OK Corral, you might have weeks to be able to respond. By the time that gets back to New York, you had weeks before that thing traveled via horseback and rumor mill back to New York for you to be able to manage the messaging. Today, it happens, it's up there before you even pick up your phone to check, hey, what's that buzz? It's already on your phone. It's happened, and you got to respond to it. And yet we still have most of our corporate communications people operating under that archaic presumption that we can control the messaging after the fact. That's you're kidding yourselves. If you don't get in front of it, it's going to get in front of you and it's going to run away on you.
Yeah, no comment doesn't cut it. When you talk about New York and everything, you made me think about a story, the famous Santa Claus story when Santa Claus was trespassed by building security. But talking about how quickly these things explode while guys were figuring we got to escalate it to corporate head office, and they got to look at it, and there's someone's going to be authorized. While they were doing that, it hit the bloody news, and it made guys laughing stock.
They were being trespassed because of the bells, right? It was the ringing of the bells was pissing people off, and so they were getting trespassed. Like, who tells Santa Claus not to ring his bells? What kind of idiot have you got running your show that would make that call to begin with? But to your point, that ran away on them, and just justifiably so, because it was just so stupid and so ludicrous that they deserved that. That to me is a company that's ill prepared. They're letting their contractors run the show as opposed to managing it. If they had been on top of that, then they would have managed that messaging beforehand. Let's talk about photos, right? Photos is a tricky spot because everybody who comes downtown, they want to take pictures. If you got a security guard who thinks that you can't take photos in my building literally, they're going to piss off so many tourists. And why do you have this beautiful building if you don't want people to take pictures of them? That always astounded me. And yet you have a sign saying no photos allowed. Talk about contradictory communications. No clarity there.
Many of the companies I work for, major companies, as a security lead, I would talk with the crisis team, the corporate communications people, and I would say, look, it's really important that we have a strategy 24/7. When something happens, we got to be able to say something to the press. And it's really nice to say that we want to, they had these things called holding messages. We have holding messages that you put out until such time on Monday morning when the crisis communication person's back in the office and make the press release. Problem is, on paper that looks fine, but the reality is that the media doesn't give a rat's ass.
Yeah.
And if it's Saturday at 5 o'clock and the 6 o'clock news is coming up, or with the 24/7 news cycle, they're not waiting until Monday. Years ago, when I was doing robbery investigations, I was just a young, inexperienced person, and there was a robbery, and it was probably $300,000-$400,000, and someone was shot. Someone from one of the French networks in Quebec, and he came up to me and he said, pretty messy, he said, how much was taken? I says, oh, I can't tell you. And he looked at me, he said, kid, he said, kid, he says, the 6 o'clock news is 40 minutes from now. So either you tell us something or we're going to make something up. And that's just the reality. And I learned a lesson that day. You can't say no comment. You got to say something. I'm not going to mention the name of the company, and I think they did an excellent job, but someone had the balls to show some initiative. They had a major shooting incident at a retail location, and a decision was made about doing an evacuation of the mall and shutting it down type thing and putting out that message. And the policy was that the security supervisor doesn't do that. It has to go to a senior leader, director, something like that. But on Saturdays and Sundays, the cell phone connectivity on the golf course isn't that good. So you had this incident occurring, and you got this young supervisor, and he knows what the policy is, but he had to make a call. And he broke the policy, but he did the right thing. I think the plans that you have in your communication plan has to be flexible enough to realize that the trained corporate communicator may not be always available when you need it. How do we train other subordinate people in the organization to handle it till we can get these people on board? There's a lot that we need to do before the stuff happens, because once it happens, if you don't have a plan, it takes on a life of its own.
And I like highlighting the fact that it was a supervisor because, especially when I do tabletops, it's consistent, not specific to one company, but there's always this resistance to letting the guys on the ground make decisions. There's a presumption that I'm the incident commander. Really? Do you really think that? I have two issues with that. First of all, if you don't trust the guy who's running that property on a Saturday or Sunday, then either you haven't trained that guy properly and it's on you because you don't have the faith in them, or you got the wrong guy, which is still on you because you hired him. You got to have the team in place to deal with stuff when it happens. Sure, things are going to go off, but you got to have the confidence that they're going to be able to respond, and then you manage the communications afterwards. If your direction from the get-go is you call me first, because you ain't going to be available when shit hits the fan, Murphy's Law, you're going to be busy. You're not going to be available. And you expect that team to just sit there and wait? That's unrealistic. It's naive, and it's going to lead to failure. 100%.
It's an example of poor leadership because the leader makes sure that he has the resources below him, unless he wants to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Stuff has a tendency to happen when the bosses aren't around. And my experience has been, quite honestly, most bosses are really good at being a boss, be it they're accountants or finance guys or things like that. They're outside of their comfort margin. As a security leader, we're trained, we're knowledgeable, we have experience on crisis management. And most companies that I worked for still wouldn't let me handle the thing. I'd have to bring in a VP of something or other. Then I end up having to educate them or fix the mess they caused.
Because of who they are, they're going to discount what your opinion is or what your expertise is. They're going to go with their gut instinct, and so be it if that's what they want to do. But then why the hell did you hire me for?
Quick story. Years ago, I worked for, I think, one of the largest financial services companies in the world, an American company. I was the director of Canadian operations. We had operations throughout the world. And we had an incredible GSOC, Global Security Operations Center, at this American city where our head office is located. And they said at the time, this was probably 20 some odd years ago, they probably spent $6 or $8 or $10 million, which was a lot of money, to put this GSOC together. And they had this crisis communication module connected to the GSOC. And we put this together, and then the bosses, the C-suite people said, hey, we're not part of this. We're not involved. So rather than fight with them, what we did, our chief security officer at the time, who was brilliant, what we did was we spent another $1 million. We built a C-suite GSOC that was overlooking the real GSOC where the work was done. And we made them think they were involved so that during an emergency, they were in their C-suite GSOC, but they couldn't interfere with where the stuff was happening. So sometimes what you got to do is you got to manage upwards. You got to play to the people that are the bosses type thing. And they have a real need to understand, but understanding and managing are two different things. And when you're putting your programs together, your crisis communication plans together, you got to be realistic. Otherwise, again, it's not going to work.
Like most SOPs, they just sit there. All right. So I think we're going to leave it there.
Just tell them about next week.
What's next week? Share with us, please.
Okay. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about PTSD and how to affect emergency management first responders, the mental health effects to first responders. We're going to bring in an expert, former very senior police leader that's now retired and working in this field.
PTSD keeps getting more and more airtime because it's becoming more and more understood and diagnosed and treated. So I'm certainly can speak to that as well with some personal experiences, and I look forward to that. Probably a little more serious episode, but hey, we're out here trying to get you guys quality information, not just something that everybody else is talking about. And hopefully we're doing that for you. If you like what we're talking about, please like our podcast, help us spread the word. We're trying to grow this puppy out and bring value to our community. So with that, I'm going to sign off to next week, and we'll talk to you guys then.
Yeah, everyone, have a great week. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Redacted Opinions. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed our podcast to help build our audience. Tune in next week for another episode of Redacted Opinions.